Now, in this lecture, we'll be dealing with the last two topics in Module 5. We'll be talking about public relations or PR, which is a marketing communication tool, and then we'll talk about the communication process in general. So let us start off our discussions with public relations or PR. We'll first of all have a discussion as to why PR is important to a company and how it acts as a marketing communication tool. And then we'll talk about the various kinds of public relation tools. Now, a company must build strong relationships with not only its suppliers, its intermediaries like wholesalers, retailers, dealers, and also with the consumers, but it also needs to bring or build this strong relationship with the public. Now, the term public or publics mean any group that has actual or potential interest or impact on the company's ability to achieve its objectives. Now, all companies, they try and sell their products and services to the customers. Now, any group of people who has or whose opinions have impact upon the company's ability to make a sale, such a group of people is what we refer to as a public. So public, their views, their opinions, they plays a very vital role in consumers making decisions on purchases. So the consumers, when they try and make a decision as to what product or service is to be purchased or used, the views of the public also has a very good, very high level of influence on this particular decision making process. So it is vital that the company builds not only strong relationship with its suppliers, its intermediaries like dealers, wholesalers, retailers, etc., and not only with the consumers but also with this set of groups what we refer to as publics. That is why most companies have a department as an exclusive department called Public Relations Department, a PR department. And this department is in charge of developing programs to promote and protect the company's image as well as to develop public relations. Now, there are various functions performed by the Public Relations Department in an organization or a company. It starts off with the very first function called press relations. Now, the press relations, they help create and place newsworthy information about the company in the news media. So that is one of the functions of the PR department, that is maintain relations with the press community and placing and creating newsworthy information about the company in news media. Then they are also involved in product publicity. They also carry out corporate communication, that is, they promote the understanding of the company both within and external to the company. So people within the company, the employees and all the stakeholders should have a clear idea about the company, and also people external to the company also should have a clear understanding about the company. So this particular communication is called as corporate communication, and this is also done by the Public Relations Department. Then they also carry out counseling activity, that is, they advertise the management about public issues that may arise. They also help in investor relations, that is, they also help in maintaining relations with shareholders and other financing community like banks, financing agencies, etc. They also help in the development of relations with donors and members of non-profit organizations, and also they play a role in lobbying, that is, they deal with government and government officials to promote legislations and regulations that positively influence the company, and they also try to defeat legislations and regulations which might harm the company. So such kinds of lobbying is also dealing with government and government officials is also done as a part of public relations. So these are the major functions carried out by the Public Relations Department of any company. Now, the impact of public relations is very high. It helps create public awareness at a much lower cost than advertising. And this particular public awareness created using public relations is much more credible than advertising, because advertising is something that is carried out intentionally to promote a particular product. So PR, it helps to create public awareness about a company, its products, etc. at a lower cost, and is much more credible than the most common kind of marketing communication tool, that is advertising. Now, despite these strengths of low cost and higher credibility, public relations play a negligible role in product marketing. That means they generally are not involved in creating awareness to potential consumers about a particular product. Rather, the PR team is usually, or the public relations team is usually busy dealing with other publics like stakeholders, employees, legislators, etc. So, despite the advantage of low cost and better credibility, PR plays very negligible role in product marketing. So the common public relation tools that are commonly used are news. News about products, the company, etc. are placed in media. Then through speeches uh, at common venues, at common general functions, through speeches, through special events like conferences, grand openings, educational programs, organization of marathons. They are all again public relation tools which are carried out as special events. Then it can be, public relation can also be established through written material like brochures, magazines, newsletters, annual reports, performance reports of a company, etc. The other public relation tool is audiovisual material. Then there are corporate ID material like corporate merchandise, like hats, t-shirts, which has the logo and the branding of the company. Then stationery, corporate stationery. Then specific buildings that are sponsored by certain corporates, logos which are attractive and distinctive, which make it attractive to the consumers. They identify this particular logo with a particular company easily. Now, example of a corporate ID material would be the case of hats and caps with corporate symbols. For example, take the case of corporates like software corporates like TCS, Cognizant, etc. They usually provide their employees with backpacks that contain the logo of that particular company and the branding of that particular company. So corporate merchandise like t-shirts, hats, backpacks, okay, with attractive logos, then providing stationery with the details of the corporate company, then buildings, specific buildings that are architecturally different, that is identified with a particular brand. Okay, so such kinds of corporate ID material is another PR tool. Then public service activities, they are also used as public relation tools. They improve the goodwill of the company by contributing money and time towards the service of the community, and then through sponsorships and through websites. So these are the most common public relation tools employed by companies. Now, the PR decision process. So the public relation decision process, it is carried out in 4 steps. It starts off with setting public relation objectives. Now, the objective of carrying on public relations might be creating awareness about a company, its products, etc. Or it might be something like information dissemination or knowledge dissemination, where detailed information regarding company, its products, etc. might be transferred. So, based upon the objectives, your way of doing things or your way of carrying on public relations will be different. So the first and most important step towards public relation decision process is to first of all set an objective. You should decide as to whether you are doing public relations to create an awareness or to spread knowledge, etc. So the objective should be very clear, and you should also identify your target audience. That is also very important. So these two are the activities carried out in the very first step called setting PR objectives. You set your objectives and identify your target audience. Now, once you have set your objectives and you have identified your target audience, the next step is choosing the public relation tool and the message. The message themes should be in alignment with the objectives. The message that you convey should be in alignment with what you are trying to achieve through that particular public relation process. So by choosing the right message theme, you will be able to achieve your public relations objective, and the right tool for that should also be chosen. Now, we have already discussed the different kinds of public relation tools. You might use media, news, sponsorship, corporate ID material, etc. So the right kind of tool should also be chosen. Then once you have chosen the right message and the tool, the next step is to implement the plan, and proper implementation of the plan is required to get the desired effect. Now, good relationship with media editors is very important to ensure that the intended message is being delivered. So the message that you create to be transferred to your target audience, they should be transferred and they should be conveyed in the intended manner. So for that to be ensured, good relationships with media editors is very important. So once you have identified your PR objectives and once you have chosen the public relation message and the proper tool, the third step is to implement the plan. Now, the last step in the PR decision making process, PR decision process, is to evaluate the results of the PR decision process. Now, this is difficult as often the indicators of the result are indirect. Some of the common indicators of the results of PR activities, public relation activities, are generally, they are reflected in terms of the sales and profit level change. They can be reflected in change in product awareness, knowledge and attitudes, etc. So generally the indicators of the effectiveness of PR, public relation, is not generally direct. They are indicated through a change in sales and profit levels, a change in the awareness, product knowledge, and the change in attitude of people towards a particular product or a company. So these things are quite difficult to evaluate. So the effectiveness of a PR program, a public relations program, is often difficult to evaluate as the indicators are generally indirect in nature. So these are the 4 steps involved in the PR decision making process. So when you're talking about setting up a public relations program, you have to first of all identify a public relations PR objective. You have to know what is your objective. You should identify a target audience. Once you have done the very first step, then you move to the second step where you think about what is the kind of message that needs to be delivered to achieve that particular objective. So the message theme should be in alignment with the objectives. They should communicate, the message should be such that they achieve the required objectives, and the right kind of PR tool, public relations tool, should also be chosen according to the kind of objective and message that they are going to deliver. Then the required plan, that is the message, should be conveyed to the required tool to implement that particular plan. And once you've implemented the plan, the last step is evaluation of results. So these are the steps involved in the public relations decision process. Now with this, we conclude the last major marketing communication tool. So in total, we have discussed 5 major marketing communication tools. Now we'll go on to the last part of this topic. That is, the last part of this model specifically, we'll go into the last part called the communication process. Now, before going into communication, the communication process, let's have a small discussion as to what communication means. Now, communication in general, it refers to transformation of information from the sender to the receiver with the information that has been transferred being understood by both parties. So, communication is nothing but a transfer of information from the sender to the receiver. And when this particular transfer takes place, if that particular transfer of information has to be called a communication, then the information that is being transferred during the communication process should be understood by both the sender and the receiver. If the sender or the receiver does not understand the information that is being transferred, then that transfer of information can never be called as a communication process. So a communication process is a process of transfer of information from the sender to the receiver with the information being understood by both the sender and the receiver. In specific marketing communication, in marketing management, communication refers to managing customer relations during the pre-selling, selling, consumption and post-consumption stages. So there are different stages through which a sales takes place. There's the pre-selling phase where the consumers are made aware of the products. There's selling phase where consumers are given information regarding a product and they make a decision. There is a consumption phase where they use the product, and then there is a post-consumption phase where they have feedbacks to be given to the intermediary or the company regarding certain products. So managing these consumer relations during these various stages, that is what communication means in marketing management. So in marketing management, communication refers to managing, or it's a process of managing customer relations during the pre-selling, selling, consumption and post-consumption stages. And proper and effective communication is important to have the right impact on the consumer. So to have effective communication, we have to first of all evaluate all the points of interaction that the customer might have with the product or the company. So the points of interaction has to be identified, and this identification is a very start of proper and effective communication. For example, a consumer who's intended on buying a particular car from a particular brand, say buying a car from Hyundai. Now, all the possible points of interaction that the potential consumer might have with the product of the company can be, they can have interaction with the company via telephonic calls to the dealers. Okay, that's one point of interaction. Another point of interaction would be the website of the company that displays the product details. That's another point of interaction. They might also interact with existing customers who own the product. Okay, so that is another point of interaction. So identifying and evaluating all the possible points of interaction of a potential customer with a particular product and the company, they have to be identified. This identification of points of interaction will help us to plan the communication process and make it as effective as possible. So all the points of interaction that the consumer might have with the product of the company, they should communicate the same thing. Each point or each different interaction point should not communicate different thing. That means the website of the company should say the same thing that the dealers and the customer service personnel of the company says, and that should be the message that should be conveyed by the existing consumers of that particular product. So all the point of interaction of the consumers should convey the same thing, and to ensure that they should identify all possible points of interaction that the consumer might have with the product or the company first. So this will help you to properly and effectively plan all your communication process so that they communicate the same message about a product or the company. So as we had discussed in the previous slide, for It is very important that for an organization that the communication is effective. That means it achieves its objective. So there are various steps in developing effective communication. And it starts off by identifying the target audience. Then once you've identified a target audience, then you determine what the communication objectives are, or what you're trying to communicate, what is the message that has been trying to be delivered to the targets. Then once you have your communication objective, you talk about what is the message that needs to be communicated. Then after that, you choose a media for sending that particular message, and you collect the feedback at the very end. So for developing effective communication, you have to undergo a 5-step process. It starts off again, as I told you earlier, it starts off with identification of target audience. Once you've identified the target audience, you determine the communication objectives. Then, based upon the communication objective, you design the message, and then you choose a media for sending that particular message. And finally, you collect a feedback or measure the effectiveness of that particular communication and make necessary changes in the message or the media chosen for delivering the message to the targets. Now, the target audience that is chosen for communication can be existing customers, they can be potential or prospective customers, or that might be people who make buying decisions or influence buying decision. So your target audience need not be always your customers or people who are going to buy, potential customers. They can also be people who influence the decision making process during a purchase. So for example, if you're thinking about purchasing a car, the purchase process, the purchase decision is influenced by a lot of people. There are friends, family, there are current users, etc., who influence that particular buying decision making process. So that whenever you communicate, you have to be very clear as to whom you're making that particular communication. So the target audience for effective communication in organizations can be either existing customers, for example, communicating service deals, service packages, etc. You're communicating it to the existing customer. They can be potential customers. For example, current car owners of a particular brand, they might, due to their brand satisfaction, they might buy your products over and over again. So you might send information regarding new product launches to those people, so they are potential buyers. And there are people who buy it, who make the buying decision or influence it, like people in the family, current customers, etc. So those can be a target audience. Now once you've identified the target audience, the next step is to determine the communication objective. Now the communication objective, it changes based upon the stage of buyer readiness. And a consumer, they passes through 6 stages on its way to making a purchase. So before actually making a purchase, he passes through 5 different stages and finally arrives at the purchase decision. So these 6 stages, including the stage of purchase, that a consumer passes through on his way to making a purchase, is referred to as the buyer readiness stages. Now, the buyer readiness stage is based upon what is the stage at which a particular consumer is at currently, or what is the stage of your target audience. What is the current stage that your target audience is in on their way to making a purchase. Based upon that, the communication objectives might be different. So the 6 stages in the buyer readiness stages are a stage of awareness, a stage of knowledge, a stage of liking, a stage of preference, a stage of conviction, and a stage of purchase. So the first buyer readiness stage is a stage of awareness, where consumers have to be made aware of the existence of a product or a service. So that is, you are making consumers aware of their choices. So if you are targeting a consumer, if your target audience is a consumer who is not at all aware of your existence of a product, then your communication objective would be basically make those people aware of this particular product as a choice for their problem or for their need. So that is the first stage that the consumer passes through on its way to making a purchase decision. So first of all, he has to be made aware. That stage is called as awareness. So here the communication objective is to make consumers aware, and the message will be designed so as to meet this particular objective. The second stage is a stage of knowledge, where he starts collecting information about the product. So he's already aware about the existing products in the market that he can buy to satisfy his need. Now he thinks about the second stage he goes through is he collects information regarding these products. So that is the stage of knowledge, and in this stage the communication objective is to provide information regarding the products or services that is produced or that is being delivered by the company. So the knowledge is a second stage of buyer readiness. Here he collects knowledge and is aware about what the products are, what the specifications of the products are, how it performs, etc. Now the third stage is a stage of liking, where he basically say, for example, he based upon the knowledge that he has or information that he has collected, he has or he develops a liking for that particular product, and he wishes to try it out on a short-term basis or on a low quantity scale. So that is a stage of liking, and he might, in this stage of buyer readiness, he might have multiple choices. He might use multiple products from multiple different brands, and he might try these out in small quantities. So when he tries out these products, he might find a certain amount of liking to certain products, and this stage of buyer readiness is called as the liking stage. Now, out of all the products that he likes, due to his use, he develops a preference for a certain product. So that is a stage of preference. So if he's given a particular product, say if he's going to buy a particular car, he has liking for a particular kind of body style. For example, he likes sedans. So his liking is towards sedans, and having test driven different sedans, he might have preference of certain brands. Now this short preference might lead to a conviction, where he is finally decided that this is a brand or the product that he is going to buy. That is a stage called conviction. And the last stage is where he actually makes the purchase. So these are the 6 stages through which a consumer passes on his way to making a purchase. So these stages are referred to as a buyer readiness stages. So they are a stage of awareness, a stage of knowledge, a stage of liking, a stage of preference, a stage of conviction, and the final stage being a stage of purchase. Now, based upon what stage your target audience occupies at a point of time, your communication objectives will also differ. And once you have the communication objective, to satisfy that communication objective, you have to design a message. For example, if your target audience is at the knowledge level where he's trying to collect information, your communication objective is to provide the potential customer or the target audience with as much information as possible. And the message that is designed, it might be in the form of an advertisement, it might be in form of a brochure. So whatever that might be, the message that is designed in such a fashion that the information that the consumer seeks is available to him in the easiest possible manner. And next, after you have chosen or designed the message to satisfy a communication objective, then you have to choose what is the media that you're going to use to deliver that particular message. Are we going for a broadcast channel? Are we going for, say, if you're using advertising, are you using sales promotion? Are you going to use public relation, direct marketing? What is the kind of media and the tool that you're going to use for making this particular communication? And finally, once you have communicated the message, then you think about collecting feedbacks. You are checking for the effectiveness of the communication by collecting feedback. And if you see that your communication objectives have been not met, Then you think about changing the message or the tool and the media used for communicating that particular message. So these are the different steps involved in developing an effective communication process. Now, coming to the various models of communication process. Now, the various models of communication process are classified into two kinds. They are the macro model for communication process and micro models for consumer responses. Now, we will first of all deal with the macro model for the communication process. Now, here, the communication process, it starts off with the sender. Now, the sender is basically a person who's is sending the message to another party, okay, and then this particular sender, he converts his ideas and information using a process, or he converts his ideas and information into a message using a process called encoding. Now, encoding is a process of assembling words and illustrations into an advertisement that will convey the intended message. So it's basically converting his ideas and information into a form which can be easily deciphered or interpreted by the receiver at the other end of the communication, sorry, the macro model for communication. So here, as I told you, in the macro model, it starts off with the sender. It ends off, the communication process ends up with the receiver receiving the information and giving a feedback. We'll come back to that later. So the sender is a person who actually initiates the communication process, and he converts his information and the idea that he has into a form that is easily understandable by the person at the other end of the communication. It can be a single person or it can be a group of people at the other end. So the sender can be an individual or a group, and correspondingly the receiver can also be an individual or a group. And the process of converting this particular information or idea using words and illustrations into a form that is easily understandable by the receiver is referred to as encoding. That particular process is referred to as encoding. Now, an example for encoding would be if a sender would like to give instructions on the process of carrying out a job. For example, you have a supervisor giving instructions to his say worker regarding how a particular process has to be carried out. Now that particular process, a step-by-step procedure, can be laid down in the form of a say a chart. So a process chart. So that particular way of conveying the information in the form of a process chart using diagrams, symbols, words, etc., that particular process is referred to as encoding. Now the encoded message is basically a set of words, pictures, symbols that the sender transmits. That is the actual uh, content of the matter that needs to be communicated. That's the message. So the message is transferred over to the receiver using a media, and media is nothing but a channel through which the message moves from the sender to the receiver. So the choice of media, it depends upon the kind of encoding that has been carried out, and it also depends upon the level or the extent of reach that this particular communication process desired to have. So the extent of coverage, for example, if you are targeting just people in a certain locale, you can use a brochure. If you are going to cover the entire nation, you might have to use a media that has a wider reach, like a broadcast media like television. So based upon the extent of coverage required and the type, how the message is encoded, your choice of media will differ. Now, this particular message is transferred over the media to the receiver, and the receiver at the other end, he interprets this encoded message in the form of words, symbols, diagrams, etc. He interprets this particular information that is encoded and sent over via a media to the receiver. He understands this, and this particular process of interpreting the information, the encoded information from the sender, is called as decoding. Now the effectiveness of how far the decoding works, or the effectiveness of decoding, depends upon whether the receiver is familiar with the way in which that particular information has been encoded. For example, if we are using a complex set of symbols which are not known to the receiver, then it would be very difficult for him to interpret that particular information. So the kind of encoding used should be based upon the characteristics of the receiver. If the receiver is not well versed with a set of encoding tools that you're using, for example, symbols, certain symbol signs, etc., that we might be using in the code, then the receiver won't be able to understand the message that was intended to be communicated in the intended fashion. He might interpret the message but interpret it in a wrong fashion. So the effectiveness of decoding depends upon how or what is your choice of encoding, and this choice of encoding has to be in correspondence with the characteristics of the receiver. Now the receiver, once he gets a particular information and once he decodes the message that is being encoded and sent by the sender to the receiver, he forms a response. He has a particular response, and this response is sent back to the sender via another media again, and this response goes back to the sender in the form of a feedback. Now you have to understand that both the message that is being transferred from the sender to the receiver and the feedback that is sent from the receiver to the sender can be subjected to certain modifications by external influences like noise. A noise is an unplanned, static, or distortion during the communication process which results in the receiver getting a different message from the one that is sent by the sender. So a noise is basically a disturbance in the media that is used for transfer of the message. Now this particular disturbance, that is the noise, will distort your actual message, and correspondingly the message that is being sent by the sender would be interpreted in a different fashion due to this particular distortion. So this distortion is caused by an external influence called noise. Now both the message that has been transferred from the sender to the receiver and the feedback that goes from the receiver to the sender stating that he has received and understood the message, that particular feedback is also, both of these are influenced by external influences called noise. So the final response that the consumer forms, it is also communicated back to the sender via a media, and this media will also be affected by noise, and correspondingly what the sender receives as a feedback from the receiver is nothing but the receiver's actual response to the decoded message plus the noise that is generated, or that accompanies the transfer of feedback or response from the receiver to the sender. So feedback is nothing but the response of the consumer to a decoded message plus the noise during this particular response transmission. So what actually reaches the sender is the response of the consumer plus the noise in the media used for that particular information transfer. So this particular model is referred to as the macro model for communication. Now we will move on to the various micro models for consumer responses. Now moving on to the micro models for consumer response. Now these models are developed based upon the consumer's specific responses to communications, efforts of communications made by the company. So based upon how a consumer responds to a communication or what is a specific intention of a particular communication process, you have different kinds of micro models for consumer responses. And these micro models assume that consumers passes through 3 different stages while making a purchase decision. So they first have to pass through a cognitive stage where they learn and collect information about a product. Then they go through an affective state where they feel or experience a product, and then they also pass through a stage called behavioral stage, which results in a person or a prospective customer being convinced and he actually makes a purchase. So these are the stages through which a consumer passes. That is a cognitive stage, an affective stage, and a behavioral stage. And these three stages are passed through while a consumer makes a purchase. But the order in which these three stages occur, they can be in different orders. So first, in certain cases, a consumer might go through a cognitive stage, then the affective stage and behavioral stage. In certain cases, it might be the behavioral stage first, followed by the affective and the cognitive stage. And in some other cases, you can see that the consumer passes through the cognitive stage first, the behavioral stage is second, and affective stage third. So based upon the order, this change in order through which a change in this the order of the stages through which the consumer passes is basically dependent upon the product, the nature of the product, the characteristic of the person, and even the daily mood of the person. They affect the order in which the consumer passes through these stages. So anyhow, when a consumer makes a purchase, he passes through these three different stages. They are the cognitive stage, affective stage, and the behavioral stage. Now, an example for the variation in the order of these stages is given below. It shows how consumer passes through these different stages in different orders depending upon the nature of product. So take the case of the first sequence where we have the learn, feel, do sequence, where the consumer first passes through a cognitive stage, then through the affective stage where he feels for and experiences the product, and then he makes a decision to make a purchase. That's the behavioral stage, that's the do stage. So the cognitive stage is represented as a learn stage where he learns and collects information about the product. The affective stage is also called as a stage of feel where he experiences the product after sampling it or using it, and then he passes through a stage called the behavioral stage, which is also referred to as the do stage, where he actually makes the purchase. So in the first sequence, it's a learn, feel, do sequence where he first of all learns about the products, he tries it, and then makes a purchase decision. So this sequence of stages is usually seen when the consumer is involved in buying a product where the consumer involvement is very high and there is high amounts of differentiation amongst the various choices that is offered to the consumer. For example, take the case of automobiles. Now, buying an automobile is basically a capital intensive process. So it's an investment that he makes. It's a very large financial investment that he makes. And this investment is generally intended to be used for a very long period of time. So his involvement in that particular decision making process is very high. Correspondingly, the products that are offered to him, the different kinds of automobiles that are offered to him, will be very different, or the variations that is seen in the products will be very different. So when there is a high level of differentiation in the products and high consumer involvement, for those kinds of products, the consumer generally passes through the different stages in the order learn, feel, and do, where he first of all learns about the product, he experiences it, and he finally makes a purchase decision. An example will be the case of automobile, where he becomes aware of his choices for different kinds of automobiles. He collects information, that is a learn stage. Then tries he test drives some of these automobiles that he has collected information about. So that is a stage of feel where he experiences the product. That's the affective stage. And then based upon the information received and based upon his experiences of using or trying out the particular product, he makes a decision whether to purchase it or not. So that is the stage of do. So this particular sequence, learn, feel, do, is specifically seen where the consumer is highly involved in a purchase process and there is a high level of differentiation amongst the products offered to him. So that is generally seen in the case of automobiles. Now the second sequence is the do, feel, learn sequence, where he first of all makes a purchase, he experiences it and then uses these experiences to learn something and use his learning for the next time he makes a similar kind of purchase. So this is used where consumer involvement in the buying process is very high, but the amounts of differentiation or the extent of differentiation amongst the choices that he have is very low. Take the case of airline ticket purchase. This is also a very capital intensive process, so his involvement in the buying process will be very high. But the kinds of things that are offered, an airline ticket is an airline ticket. There is not much differentiation that can be brought to air travel. So the amount of differentiation offered by different companies, for example, a person looking for an economy ticket in Etihad against Emirates, the amount of differentiation that can be offered for such a kind of a product will be very, very low. So in such kinds of products, what he does is he basically purchases a ticket, he experiences or he flies using that particular airline, okay, and he makes an experience for himself, and then based upon his experiences he garners certain information as to how that particular product is. So the sequence here is he basically makes a purchase, uses it and experiences it, and based upon his experiences he learns about the product. So such a kind of sequence is called as a do, feel, learn sequence, and this is generally seen when consumer involvement in the purchasing process is very high and there is low levels of differentiation in the products offered to the consumer. And the last sequence that is commonly seen is a learn, do, feel sequence, where the consumer first learns about the products, he buys the product, and then he experiences the product. So he does not actually buy the product first and then experiences it and then collects information, but rather he learns about the product, he buys a product, and then he makes experience. So this is used when the consumer involvement in the buying process is low and there is low amounts of differentiation in the products. Take the case of buying of salt. It's a very low capital investment process where you buy salt. So the amount of involvement by the consumer in that particular decision making process is low. But even though the amount of involvement is low, he tries and learns about the products, then he buys that particular salt, he uses it, and then based upon his usage, he thinks about whether to buy the particular product over and over again or not. So that is a sequence called learn, do, feel sequence. Now amongst these three sequences, the most common sequence is a learn, feel, do sequence, where first of all the consumers learn about the product, he feels or tries a particular product out on a sample basis or a trial basis, and then he buys a particular product. So this is the most common order or sequence of stages through which a consumer passes during a purchase process. So as I told you, the order in which these stages are passed through by a consumer, it depends upon the product. It also depends upon the product. It also depends upon the person, his individual nature, and also his daily mood. Even a person with a particular kind of behavior, on a daily spur of the moment, he might make a purchase. So even based upon his daily mood of the person, this order in which the stages are passed through by a consumer while making a purchase will be different. Now, the most common micro models for consumer responses are the IDA model, which is the attention, interest, desire, and action model, and the hierarchy of effects model, which is proposed by Lavage and Steiner. And there are also other proposed micro models for consumer responses like information processing model, Michael-Ray model, an FCB model, and innovation adoption model. Now, out of these different kinds of micro models for consumer response, we will limit our discussions to the two major ones, that is the IDA model and the hierarchy of effects model. The others, the description of the other models are given in the textbook. You may go through the textbook and learn them on your own, as these concepts are quite simple to understand. Now we'll limit our discussions to the two major micro models for consumer response, We'll talk about them in detail in this slide. So with the discussion of the IDA model and the hierarchy of effects model, we would conclude our fifth module. Now, the most common micromodel for consumer response used is the IDA model. This was one of the very first models to be developed, one of the micromodels to be developed. Now, the IDA model, it stands for attention, interest, desire, and action. And according to this particular model, the marketing team should focus upon communicating messages that will first create or get the attention of the consumers. Then they should focus upon developing interest and then creating a desire, and this will eventually lead to a purchase or an action. So the marketing communication or the messages conveyed by a marketing team to prospective consumers, they should not always be the same, because you might have people that are in different stages of their purchase decision. For example, some might be people who are not aware of your product or your brand, a particular company's brand or products. So for those kinds of people, there should be certain messages that are targeted at getting their attention and making them aware of the brand or the product, which will help them solve their problem or need. So those kinds of messages are targeted at people who are unaware of their choices. Then there are people who are aware of their choices, but they have to be convinced. The company has to make concerted efforts in developing interest and developing a desire in the particular prospective customer in buying the particular product. So there should be certain communicating messages that are communicated to the consumers that will develop interest in them and also develop or lead to a desire in the consumer to make a purchase. So all marketing communications are not, their objectives are different, and these objectives differ because all the consumers, they are not at the same stage during a purchase decision making process. Some are collecting information, some are developing interest, some are developing a desire, etc. So there should be different kinds of marketing communication messages that are targeted at different people at different levels of their or different stages in the decision making process. So marketing should essentially focus upon communicating messages that will first get attention. Then they should focus upon communicating messages that will develop interest, and then they should convert these interests into desires, and this particular conversion of interest to desire through certain messages will eventually result in the consumer or a prospective consumer making a purchase. Now this IDA model is generally used for marketing consumer non-durables like ice cream, soft drinks, etc. Now the second micro model that is most commonly used is the hierarchy of effects model, and this was proposed by Lavich and Steiner. Now this particular theory is based upon the classical psychological model that divides consumer behavior into three stages. That means they assume that consumers pass through three different stages during the process of purchase decision making. So they pass through a stage of cognition, they pass through an affective stage, and they pass through a cognitive or a motivation stage. And based upon what stage that they are currently in, the kind of message that is delivered to them should be different. So the hierarchy of effects model is based upon classic psychological model that divides consumer behavior into cognitive behavior, affective behavior, and motivational behavior. So the stages that they pass through correspondingly are the cognitive stage, the affective stage, and the motivation stage. And in cognitive stage, what the marketing team should focus upon is making prospects become aware about certain products and brands, and they should help them provide the required information about the product or service. So in this cognitive stage, prospects are becoming aware about products and brands, and they also collect information regarding products and So information collection or knowledge generation as well as awareness generation is what takes place during a cognitive stage. The second stage is a stage where the prospect starts to develop a liking and preference for a product. This stage is called as an affective stage. And the third stage is a motivational or cognitive stage where a prospect is convinced and finally makes a purchase. An example for this would be the case where a consumer uh, who constantly comes across a brand called LG. So LG's washing machine, for that particular matter, he or she sees a particular advertisement on the paper, on the television, on billboards, etc. So using flow from brochures, flyers, etc. So he's constantly being bombarded with advertisements regarding washing machines from a particular brand, say LG. So this kind of advertisement basically makes him or her aware about his choice of LG offering a product, a washing machine that might be a potential solution to a problem that he might have in the future. Then once he's bombarded, he might be persuaded to collect in more information regarding a product, whereby he might sometimes go to a dealer and see the demo of that particular product for himself or herself. So that is a stage where he collects information. So together with advertisement and his direct approach to a dealer who demonstrates or demos the product, the actual real life product to him, this is the stage of cognition. So the second stage, once he collects the required information, now he might go and meet people or his friends or family who are using the same kind of product, say the LG washing machine. So hearing positive responses from them will lead to that particular person developing a liking and a preference for that particular product and that particular brand. So this is a stage of affection where he or she develops a liking and preference for a particular product and a brand. And then in the case where the person or the family that is considering that had collected the information regarding the particular washing machine, his or her maid all of a sudden does not come to work for quite a few days. So that particular stage basically puts them in a spot where they might be required to buy a particular washing machine. So a maid who usually washes the clothes for them, who regularly used to come and wash the clothes for them, one fine day she might not turn up for quite a long time, and this might force a particular family to make a purchase of a washing machine. And since they have already come across advertisements and they have already gone and experienced these products in the dealer and hearing positive responses, they usually have a preference and liking for that particular product. And this will lead to that particular person being convinced that this is the product that they need, and then they will finally make a purchase. So the stage where a prospect is basically convinced and makes a purchase, that is a stage called motivational or cognitive stage. So this is the very last model, the micro model for consumer response that we'll be dealing in class. The other micro models, they can be learned on your own. They are quite simple and they are easily described in the textbook. So with this, we conclude module number 5.